my name is Melinda, and this is a Web of Stories, and this video I know looks a little different. I'm filming it while my daughter's at school because I was just about to film a vlog entry, but then I realized what I had to say was a bit too much for a vlog entry. So I thought, well, I'm just gonna strike while the iron is hot and get my thoughts down now. And I apologize now. This is going to be an even more rambly video than mine usually are. I do have a tendency to ramble. Anyway, last night I finished Lord Edgware Dies by Agatha Christie. Should also add, I'm filming this using my front camera on my phone, so if everything's backwards, that's why. This book, Lord Edgware Dies. I got things to say about this book. So great mystery, very smart mystery, very well done mystery, but a hell a lot of racism, well, a bit of racism and a lot of anti-Semitism in this book. So that is an issue. When I come across books that have these issues, the first thing I ask myself, is this a situation where the author is just sort of basically a garbage human? Or is it a case where they are a product of their time? And in this case, it's the latter. So what I'm saying is that the views in Agatha Christie's novels reflect the views of her society at the time. That doesn't make them right. I'm not excusing them. I'm just saying that's the light in which I look at it. Agatha Christie's not an outlier here. And it's bad. It's a horrible thing that society used to view issues in these ways, but it is what it is. So I say that because if it turned out that had been just a case of someone just not a great person, had these views on their own, I wouldn't continue with the book. But because it's more of a reflection on a society in a certain time, I'm willing to go ahead and read it. That being said, there was enough in this book that it really impacted my enjoyment of it. So I struggled in that way. Now there's two issues, and I kind of want to separate them a little bit. So the first is, it happens on the same page 20 in my copy. She uses a derogatory term for Chinese people. And she uses the N-word, and both in ways that make no sense, really. I was very perplexed by that, why she would use those. And I think in the former, in the term for people of Chinese descent or people who are Chinese, that is another case where that's what they were called at the time. It was a product of her time, and that's not cool, but it is what it is. In the case of the N-word, because it makes absolutely no sense the way she uses it, and she does have a history with this word. For those of you who don't know, her most famous novel, which I think comes out in the same decade, the 1930s, was originally titled 10 Little N-Words. And then someone told her, that's not a cool title, and it's not going to sell well, at least not in the United States. So then she changed it, and she changed some of the content in the book because that was also reflected in the book. I think that in this case, she didn't understand the actually what the N-word meant and all its connotations. That does not excuse her. That just makes it bad in a different light. And I just want to say that because that's different in my mind than the anti-Semitism. That is ignorance. And I'm not saying that anti-Semitism is not ignorant, but I am saying that that is more of a view that society held. So anyway, I was really troubled by this. And then at the same time, I became aware, originally through the All About Agatha podcast, but then I read up more on it, that Agatha Christie is pretty much the next author who's getting the sensitivity treatment. So we have had it with Dr. Seuss, where I do actually feel the Seuss estate handled it very well by just saying these books here that are problematic, we're just not going to publish them anymore. There's still copies to be had, but we're just not going to put more copies out. I think that's a good way of doing it. And then we had Roald Dahl and his, where that one's a little bit different. First of all, I think that they were a little too zealous in some of the changes that they made. But also I'm really torn on these changes being made without the author's consent. Both Dahl and Christie and Fleming, who's also kind of going through this, they're all dead. They can't give consent. So with Christie's case, basically it's already started. I guess there are new digital versions of some of her novels where problematic language, basically in terms of anti-Semitism and racism, have been removed. And I will say in this case, you could take the anti-Semitism out and the racism out, and it wouldn't change the story at all. That has nothing to do with the story. You wouldn't even miss it. But I have not read all of her books, so I'm not sure if that's the case in all of them. My guess is it probably is, because I've read enough to kind of think that's just the way it is. So now, you know, when it was just Dahl and Seuss, it was kind of like a thought thing for me, like, that's interesting. What do I feel about that? Blah, blah, blah. But now it's an author that, I mean, I read at least one Agatha Christie novel a month. This is an author that I'm actively reading. And now I'm like, okay, now what do I think about it? And it was really, I think it was serendipitous that I was reading this book when it came out, when I kind of found out about that news, because this book is so problematic in those areas. So the current publisher, with the consent of the Agatha Christie estate, which is run by her great-grandson, has started to remove some problematic language. Now, I'm kind of torn on this because, as I said, I do think that if an author decides to remove the language or gives the okay for that to happen, that's one thing. I'm fine with it. But when the author's not there, I mean, So I read up about it. I read a bunch of different sources. I tried to read from kind of all ends of the spectrum. So I read like The Guardian and CNN. I read the New York Post article, which was garbage. Don't read that. This is stupid culture war baiting garbage. But the two, I'm gonna actually link to two articles in the description box below. One is from the Guardian, which seems to be the first one to report on this. And that's probably the most comprehensive article. But then I'm also gonna link to an article from the Times of Israel, which has a very specific viewpoint on it, which I thought was interesting. But they also say something really interesting that kind of changed my way of thinking about it. And of course my camera thing's right over it. So hold on, I'm going to shift one sec. Okay, I'm back, a slightly different angle. I'm going to read to you this passage from the article in the Times of Israel, which makes me feel a little bit better about the Agatha Christie issue, although I still have generally issues about this, but this is what the article says. Right after World War II and the Holocaust, Christie authorized her U.S. publishers to remove other language about Jews that the company deemed controversial. The Guardian reported that at least one of the titles of her books was changed to remove racist language in the 1970s. That was And Then There Were None. As I said, different title earlier. At least I think that was, because And Then There Were None came out in the 30s, and I think that it was changed. So I think there was a different, I think that's a different book, because the And Then There Were None came out much earlier than that. Anyway, and then it goes on to say, this is a quote from a book. As her circle of acquaintances widened and she grew to understand what Nazism really meant for Jewish people, Christie abandoned her knee-jerk anti-Semitism, wrote Gillian Gill in her 1990 book, Agatha Christie, The Woman and Her Mysteries. I'm gonna readjust my camera because this is a weird angle. And we're back. So, okay, I feel a little bit better knowing that in the past, when Agatha Christie was alive, she gave an okay to publishers to change things that were problematic. And she realized that her feelings were incorrect and her beliefs were incorrect. I feel better about that. Still being said, I'm not a fan of just going in and just changing things whenever they're problematic. For one thing, I think it is important that the works in their original form remain. Not so much from a literary point of view, because I will be honest, I would have enjoyed Lord Edgware Dies much better if I had read an edited version of it that had taken that out. However, had I known it was edited, and I probably would have been upset about it. So I guess I just can't be happy. Whatever. Anyway, from a historical point of view, I think it is important to keep these books in their original form available. And an example I will give is looking back in 1939, and Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's decisions regarding Nazi Germany seem really strange now. Like, you should have known better, all this. However, this book, which came out in 1933, shows a society where a decision like that wouldn't be seen as strange. This is a record of a time. And so I do think there is value in keeping the books in their original form. I also feel this book would have been a lot more enjoyable without all those comments. So I kind of went back and forth on this and what people should do and all that. So I kind of, in my mind, come up with like a good way for books to handle this. If anyone's listening, which I doubt anybody is, but here it is. First of all, I say, if you're going to do a sensitized version, I believe that's the term you're going to use for the book, is a sensitized version of a classic novel. Fine. Be sure you say in the book, have a little blurb at the front saying this book, came out on this date. The world was different then. People thought differently. There were things in this book that are now considered offensive. We have removed those elements. This does not impact the story. Blah, put that right there. But then also have the original one available that says a version of the same thing saying, just so you know, there's some things in this book that are offensive. This is what was considered right at the time. Be upfront about it. Have both available. Let people make the choice as to which version they want to read. And because I do understand, I think it would be, even I'm not Jewish and I was offended by this. And I think it would be even worse if I were Jewish and I read these sorts of things that are in this book. I've seen that tact taken before in a very interesting place. A couple years ago, about a year ago actually, we decided to introduce our kids to the original Muppet Show because they're now on Disney Plus. And if you watch the Johnny Cash episode, at the beginning, there's a card that comes up and it says something along the lines, this episode contains imagery that we now realize is offensive. This does not represent the Muppets, Jim Henson Productions, Disney Plus. We apologize for any offense. We're not editing it out, but it's there. Just so you know, we're aware that it's wrong. And what it was is when Johnny Cash was performing, there was a Confederate flag in the background. I think that, kind of depends what the situation is, but that one would have been hard to edit out other than putting a big black bar over it or something. I don't know. But I think that's an okay way of doing it. I think just like acknowledgement goes a really long ways. I guess where I want to go is I do think that the doll episode, the doll issue with his books being done over, I think they were overzealous, and I think it's being done in not a great way. I think Seuss was better about it. And I think there is a way for publishers to walk that line, to say, all the racist and the anti-Semitic comments in this book are not okay. And you don't have to read them if you don't want to. We're going to give you this option. And I will also tell you that this book was edited in the past, because there are versions of this book that I believe do not include the two racist comments that are on page 20 of this book. It just depends what issue you have. I think that the reader should have a choice of what they want. And I think, I don't think the decision should be made for people, but I think the options are a good way of doing it. I still have problems with books being edited without the author's consent. I think that in this case it's okay because Agatha Christie is on record for giving consent to edits in the past, which makes me feel better about it. And I think it's a really fine line that publishers are going to have to walk, but I think there's ways that they can do it. And I think the two big things is they need to be able to give readers a choice, and they need to be upfront with readers. Those are the two things. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Agatha Christie and the issues with this book. Should you read this book? It's a great mystery. If you love mysteries, this is a great mystery. There is a digital version apparently that does not have the anti-Semitic and racist comments in it. I think it's the newest digital version if you are interested in that. Otherwise, know that they're there, and if it's going to be too much for you, then it's going to be too much for you. And that's unfortunately too bad. Too bad for the book, not too bad for you, because your feelings are valid. And I'm sure, I mean, I'm going to be completely honest, there's going to be things that we say now that are considered okay that 50 years from now are not going to be considered okay. That's the way language works, and that's the way society works. And I think that publishing is just now starting to work its way through this. And there have been successes in the way they've handled it, and there have been missteps in the way they've handled it. And I'm just hoping that the Agatha Christies are going to be a success and not a misstep. So again, give readers a choice and be upfront. That's, I think, the magic formula to this. So anyway, I would be really interested, because I know people have different thoughts on this. So if you have any thoughts on this move to edit or sensitize older classic novels, please let me know. I'd really love to hear what other people think about it. I'm open to hearing other ideas. As I said, my ideas are still forming. I kind of think about it on a case-by-case basis. But anyway, if you made it this far, I'm sorry about the weird the weird camera angles, but you know, my daughter's not around to set things up for me. So anyway, thank you very much for staying with me through this. If you can, give me a little thumbs up and subscribe to my videos so you can hear me ramble on and on and on about all sorts of other things. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.